So, what is a worldview? A worldview is simply a way of seeing the world. The seeing or viewing, however, is not a seeing with the eyes. Rather, it's a seeing with the mind, a perception of the meaning of things, the nature of things, the relationship between things. Nor is the world simply the earth. The world is everything there is, or to be more precise, everything one thinks there is. A worldview, then, is a seeing or perception or understanding of reality in an ordered, though often unconscious way, which enables a person to find meaning in reality and the relationships they believe exist between things. Some illustrations may be helpful. First up, a general illustration about the effect of a consciously hurled worldview. On an excursion into one of the less travelled parts of a New Zealand national park, my wife and I and our youngest daughter and her husband climbed above the bushline and travelled for about 5 kilometres along a ridge. Towards the end of this ridge we were to sidle on its south side below a peak, climb to a saddle and then sidle to the north underneath another peak onto another ridge. We had been warned this turning point was very easy to miss under even the best of conditions. We were then to descend down the new ridge to our destination, the Lonely Lake Hut, a small 3-bunk hut, which incidentally is not one of the best appointed tramping huts in New Zealand. It was a lovely day for tramping on the tops, light overcast, so not too hot, with spectacular views into deep and very steep bush-clad valleys. All day on the south side of the ridge, cloud was coming and going as it moved up to the ridge and then dissipated. But just before we arrived at the crucial turning point to get onto the new ridge, the cloud spilled over the ridge and visibility went down immediately to probably less than 20 metres. We missed the turn in the fog and spent about an hour working out which way to go, but with virtually no visual clues to guide us. Even after we were convinced we were on the correct ridge and had a few rock cairns and a path at times to guide us, the visibility was just as bad. For the next 2.5 hours, we had no idea what lay around us and lost the way on numerous occasions. I thought we should at least get indications we were approaching a valley floor, but no indications appeared. And then suddenly, to our surprise and relief, we were at the hut with its welcome shelter from the moist, despondent conditions outside. Next morning, we awoke to an almost perfect day, and in our climb out from the hut on that same track we had come down, we understood what we had missed the evening before in the fog. We simply had no idea we were descending to the end of such a steep, rugged and spectacular valley. And I realised why I hadn't seen indications of a valley floor. There wasn't one. Having a consciously hurled worldview is like travelling in clear weather and seeing where you're going, as opposed to travelling in fog without a clue in the world as to what's around you. Of course, a consciously hurled worldview which appears to those who hold it to give such clarity of vision may in fact be out of line with reality, and so actually be giving a severely distorted view, even on a par with being in a fog. It's as though the few signs visible in the fog are misinterpreted, leading you to think you're on the right path when you're not. Nevertheless, your sight, whether faulty or not, enables you to make apparent sense of the world, even if that sense is actually nonsense and is leading you badly astray. Now, imagine we have a pair of spectacles sitting on our nose. The glasses affect the way we see the world. I have some moderate examples here. Has anyone fallen in love? Here are some rose-coloured spectacles. When you fall in love, the world seems like a friendlier place, with brighter colours. You feel happy and may whistle and sing and skip and dance. At least generally have an optimistic outlook on things. Being ditched by the person you love would normally produce the opposite, sadness and depression, a world turned grey or black. Here's a bad case of tunnel vision. Tunnel vision, of course, refers to a person being obsessed with one thing, refusing to see alternatives. It's like they have some pipes on their eyes and can only see the tiny bit at the end of the pipe. Most of reality is blocked from view. Here's a variation on tunnel vision. Gardeners may use a sieve to prepare fine soil for a seed bed. You want the good soil but not the stones, so you put it all in the sieve and you shake it about. The soil goes through but the stones stay in the sieve. A worldview can function as a sieve which simply filters out, ignores or excludes aspects of reality which the holder has predetermined do not exist. Another variation of this is described as being one-eyed. Clear, correctly focused glasses enable those with less than 20/20 vision to see with clarity, to see the world as it really is. None of us naturally have 20/20 vision when it comes to worldviews. Another analogy would be to think of our mind as being like a stack of boxes that enable us to separate things into some sort of an order. The mail, for example, comes into a mail sorting centre, and on the basis of a mailbox ordering system, utilising addresses, gets sorted so that on the basis of this amazing worldwide address and mail system, we get the mail sent to us. Some of it goes into our letter boxes at our homes. Some goes into local post office boxes. Some goes national by road. And some, fast post or international mail, goes by plane. And the system is so good for developed countries that I'm not personally aware of ever having missed mail sent to me. For special items, you can get tracking numbers so you can find out where your item is en route to you. In a similar way, the particular things of the world flood into our minds, and it's on the basis of our worldview that we sort them into some sort of order, and so make sense of them all. Sometimes what can be called an integrating principle comes to us like a bolt out of the blue. Suddenly, in a flash of inspiration, we see how things fit, whereas prior to this experience, we didn't. Perhaps it's a conversion experience where we consciously shift from one way of thinking to a radically different one. One leading local skeptic of a few years ago in my hometown claimed to have been an active Christian fundamentalist throughout his high school years, but on going to university was exposed to evolution as the integrating principle and converted to atheism overnight. I've heard New Age versions of the same thing, when, for example, the person perceived for the first time a oneness between all things in the universe. Some people become Christians like that. Blam, out of the blue, the Christian gospel answers issues thrown up by life. The design in the world, is it real or only apparent? The profoundly contradictory human condition exposed in ourselves and others, and the relationships between people and people groups. A tension they may feel between life being meaningful in daily activities, yet meaningless in the long run. Perhaps the integrating principle comes as a major clarification of thinking already held. My understanding of the importance of creation came about like that. In the space of a talk of 1.5 hours, confusion that had ruled like an unperceived fog in my thinking until that time cleared, and I could see with a clarity that was stunning and affects me still. The integrating principle that people perceive as giving them clarity of thought may not be correct. In fact, it could be totally wrong. Nevertheless, it may still function as the basis of or a major part of a worldview, and so do the job of integration to some degree. Another illustration. Think of the world as a jigsaw. Out in the world there are a myriad of particular things and collections of things. There are cars and chairs and people and planets and galaxies and molecules and atoms, right down to subatomic particles, whatever they are. We could say that each particular thing corresponds to an individual piece of the jigsaw. If you scatter the pieces of a jigsaw, basically you have a scrambled mass of particular things, which individually convey only a very small amount of information to you, and as a group most certainly do not form a coherent picture. It's basically meaningless. In a jigsaw, each piece has a special relationship to certain other pieces which relate to yet other pieces, such that when they're put together they make up a coherent, recognizable, meaningful picture. How do you make sense of the scrambled pieces? Well, fortunately for most of us, jigsaws come in boxes on which the maker has placed their picture of what the completed jigsaw will look like. And so, armed with the picture on the box, we attack the pieces on the table and search out the pieces that fit with each other. And as we do so, progressively the picture takes shape before our eyes. The picture on the box is a bit like our worldview. From the picture in our minds of what we think or presuppose the world should look like, we seek to understand or make sense of everything outside of us. This picture gives us a framework of meaning to operate from, a broader perspective from which to make sense of all the bits that individually don't tell us what they mean. Now, if we agree that the world is like a jigsaw, that all the individual things in it actually do have a meaning and do go together with everything else, the whole being meaningful also, then perhaps we should be aware of some of the background, even undetected assumptions we're making. We're assuming there's a coherence, a togetherness, or a unity about the universe. That the individual parts of it actually do go together to form a picture and aren't just an incoherent collection of unrelated individual things. That the design in the universe is real, not simply apparent. And then if we seek to find meaning in life, a meaning that somehow transcends all the bits of life, and everyone does, we're assuming that the universe and life actually have a meaning which can be discovered. And this is so even if we're a Richard Dawkins on a dedicated drive to show that the world, which he acknowledges looks designed, was in fact not designed at all. Or if we're one of a myriad of others who ironically are bent on persuading others by means of words with meaning that everything is meaningless. This assumption of meaning is all-pervasive and mostly made intuitively and without explicit or conscious thought. But in worldview terms, in cases such as Richard Dawkins and the like, it's a quite unjustified assumption. They postulate that the world has no thought behind it, and so explicitly argue that as a result the world is ultimately without meaning. And yet they live their lives day by day, assuming meaning. If they really believe the world is without meaning, one would expect them to live that belief out. They don't, and they can't. Something I think indicates their belief does not conform to reality. A worldview, to be credible, needs to be livable. A quest for the meaning in life, or action based on the assumption of meaning, whether we know it or not, or acknowledge it or not, presupposes a jigsaw maker, who is outside of the jigsaw, who's imposed meaning on, or given meaning to, all the bits of the jigsaw, and has designed them to fit together. Some worldviews have no place for a jigsaw maker or transcendent meaning giver anywhere. So for those who hold such a worldview, a search for meaning or action presupposing meaning is in fact meaningless, just like everything else, and is inconsistent within their own framework of thought. They need to flog intellectual capital from a worldview they reject to make theirs work. Everyone has a worldview, though not everyone is conscious they have one. You may never have heard of the idea before. Nevertheless, you have a worldview. If you're not aware of your worldview, the one you hold will most likely be garbled. In fact, I think most people's worldviews are garbled for the reason that most people don't think consciously in worldview terms and therefore make no great effort to be consistent in their thinking. For a variety of reasons, ideas from different worldviews are mixed and matched without the individual perhaps ever stopping to assess whether they're compatible. A bit like people attempting to do a jigsaw where several jigsaws are mixed together but without bothering to stop and check why some pieces look different. Because of such garbling factors, large numbers of Christians don't have their worldview sorted out. Some do, but I pick most don't. In the same way, most secular people haven't sorted things into a consciously held worldview either. A few have, but most haven't. A number of years ago, I attended a New Zealand Skeptics Society conference at which a leading New Zealand atheist Marxist educator was invited to give a keynote address. In his talk, he was very honest about the effect the fall of the Berlin Wall and the demise of the Soviet Union had on his understanding of the world, humorously describing these as firstly the wheels falling off his car and then the engine dropping out. He seemed a frank, personable sort of guy, the sort of person I could talk to on matters that are serious, so I sent him by mail the material on which the humanistic part of this series is based. I mailed it on the Wednesday after the conference, and he would have received it Friday morning. On Friday night at about 6 p.m. I received a call from him. He had already read it and found it very interesting, so much so that he rang me at the first opportunity. We had a very amiable discussion for about an hour with all cards on the table. Here was an atheist who thought very specifically in worldview terms, who could put his worldview outside of himself, as it were, to be discussed dispassionately. Sadly, the swiftness of his response and the respect with which he treated both me and the serious challenge I had presented to him puts to shame many I've dealt with over the years who claim to be Christians. So, what is a worldview? A worldview is simply a way of seeing the world. The seeing or viewing, however, is not a seeing with the eyes. Rather, it's a seeing with the mind, a perception of the meaning of things, the nature of things, the relationship between things. A worldview, then, is a seeing or perception or understanding of reality in an ordered, though often unconscious way, which enables a person to find meaning in reality and the relationships they believe exist between things.